A 16-year-old boy gets thrown out of school, wanders around New York for 3 days, insults nearly everyone he meets, and decides the entire adult world is phony. That's it. That is very nearly the whole plot. And yet this slim little book has spent 70 years being one of the most loved, most argued over, and most frequently banned novels ever written. So the real question isn't what happens in it. It's why so many people, including maybe you, have finished it and come away with completely the wrong idea. Because underneath the sarcasm, this is not the story people think it is. And by the end of the next 10 minutes, I think you'll see it completely differently. Along with the deeply strange man who wrote it and why it still matters so much. The book is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. And hold on to one thing as we go, because it's the key to everything. The man who wrote this became so famous that he spent the next 50 years hiding from the world. No interviews, no photographs, no new books. And the deepest reason why isn't the fame at all. It's something that happened to him years before he finished a single chapter. We'll come back to it. The boy telling us the story is Holden Caulfield, and from the very first page, he's speaking straight to you. Casual, funny, cutting, and very obviously not okay. He's just been expelled from Pensy Prep, which is already the 4th school he's failed out of, and he cannot bring himself to go home and watch his parents' faces when they hear. So instead, he does something quietly desperate. He slips away into New York City for a few days, to be alone until the bad news catches up with him on its own. And as he moves through the city, one word keeps coming out of him. Phony. Everyone is a phony. Teachers, actors, smooth-talking men in bars, anyone at all. It's tempting to hear that as ordinary teenage contempt, the sound of a boy who thinks he's better than everyone. But if you listen to what he actually attacks, it's always the same thing. People performing, people playing a role to get something, saying what they don't mean. Holden's fury isn't really aimed at adults. It's aimed with painful precision at insincerity, and that turns out to matter enormously. So he drifts through the city alone, and every attempt he makes to reach another person quietly falls apart. He checks into a shabby hotel and watches the sad, strange people in the windows across the way. He goes to nightclubs and gets refused drinks for being too young. He telephones old girlfriends at absurd hours just to hear a voice. He even hires a prostitute. And then, when she arrives, he can't go through with any of it. He only wants someone to talk to. And gets beaten up by her pimp for the trouble. Over and over he reaches out, and over it goes wrong. The pattern reaches its saddest pitch on a date with a girl called Sally. Out of nowhere, he blurts out a desperate plan. Run away with me right now, we'll live in a cabin in the woods, away from all of it. She quite sensibly says no. And instead of hearing the fear underneath his own idea, he lashes out, calls her a pain in the neck, and wrecks the entire afternoon. That's the rhythm of the whole book. Holden reaching for someone with real need, and then torching the connection the instant they fail to understand him. And here's the thing the book quietly hands you, the thing most people race straight past. Holden had a younger brother named Allie. Allie died of leukemia at 11 years old when Holden was 13. He mentions it almost casually, the way you mention a thing you can't bear to look at directly. And then tells us that on the night Allie died, he smashed every window in the garage with his bare fists and had to be taken to hospital. He still carries Allie's old baseball mitt with him everywhere, its fingers covered in little poems Allie had written on it in green ink to read during dull moments in the outfield. Once you know about Allie, the entire book changes shape in front of you. Holden is not a sulky teenager who hates everyone. Holden is a grieving child in the middle of a breakdown, and not one adult around him has noticed. They're all too busy or too drunk or too keen on getting something from him. He's coming apart in a city of 8 million people, reduced to asking taxi drivers where the ducks in Central Park go when the whole lagoon freezes over. And that odd little question is really the deepest one in the book. What happens to the small, defenseless things when the world turns cold? You can feel the same fear in the things he clings to. He loves the Museum of Natural History and tells us exactly why. The glass cases never change. The same birds, the same fishing Eskimo, frozen in place every single time you visit, no matter how much you've fallen apart since you last stood there. What Holden longs for, underneath everything, is a world that will simply hold still, one where nothing precious is ever allowed to slip away again. The one person who can reach him is his little sister, Phoebe. She's 10 years old, sharp as a tack, and she sees straight through every evasion he has. He risks everything to sneak home in the dark just to sit on her bed and talk to her. And it's Phoebe, not any adult, who gently backs him into the truth, demanding he name a single thing he actually likes, one thing in the whole world. And he can barely do it. And then, for her, he manages to put his one true wish into words, the daydream that gives the book its name. He pictures an enormous field of rye on the edge of a cliff, full of little children running and playing, with no adults anywhere in sight. And the only job he wants in all the world is to stand at the edge of that cliff and catch any child who comes running too fast and too close before they can fall. That's it. That is the catcher in the rye. And here Salinger does something quietly devastating, because Phoebe corrects him. The line Holden is dreaming on comes from an old Robert Burns poem, and it doesn't say catch a body coming through the rye. It says meet a body. Holden has built his one pure fantasy on a line he misheard. He wants to catch the falling children. But the poem was only ever about people meeting, brushing past each other in a field. Even his rescue mission is founded on a mistake, and somewhere in him he already senses the truth it points to. You cannot actually catch them. Nobody can. Because what Holden is truly terrified of was never adulthood as such. It's the loss of innocence. The same force that took Allie, that will one day reach Phoebe, and that has, in some quiet way, already taken Holden himself. His whole rebellion, when you finally see it clearly, isn't rebellion at all. It's a frightened, grieving boy standing at the edge of a cliff with his arms out, trying with everything he has to hold back time. So it all comes to a head. Wild with despair, Holden decides to run away out west for good and asks Phoebe to meet him one last time to say goodbye. She turns up dragging a suitcase behind her, because she is coming too. And the shock of that, the sight of his little sister ready to fall out of her own childhood to follow him, breaks the plan in his hands. He refuses to let her come. And to make peace, he takes her instead to the carousel in the zoo. And it's here, in the very last pages, that the whole book quietly resolves into a single image. Phoebe rides the carousel, round and round, reaching out each time for the gold ring the way children do. Holden sits alone on a bench in the pouring rain and watches her reach. And suddenly he's crying and tells us he has never in his life been so happy, because he finally understands what the carousel is showing him. Children reach for the gold ring, and sometimes they lose their grip and fall, and you cannot protect them from it. All you can do is let them ride and love them and hope. In that moment, Holden lets go of catching, and only now do we learn he has been telling us all of this from a hospital where he's being treated after his breakdown. The whole book a boy, explaining himself from inside the crisis. Which brings us, at last, back to the man who wrote it, because the deepest reason he vanished is buried in his own life. Jerome David Salinger landed on Utah Beach on D-Day. He then fought across Europe for 11 straight months through the Battle of the Bulge and the Hurtgen Forest, one of the most murderous campaigns of the entire war, and watched his regiment be cut to pieces around him. And near the end, he was among the soldiers who helped liberate a Nazi concentration camp. He said years later that you never quite get the smell of burning flesh out of your nose, no matter how long you live. He was hospitalized for what we would now call post-traumatic stress. And here is the almost unbearable detail that ties the whole thing together. Salinger carried the early chapters of The Catcher in the Rye with him all through that war, folded into his pack. He wrote pieces of Holden in foxholes under fire. A book aching to protect the innocence of children was being written page by page by a young man watching innocence destroyed on a scale the world had never seen. Holden's desperate wish to stand at the cliff and catch them was Salinger's too. When the book finally came out in 1951, it made him instantly, overwhelmingly famous, and he could not stand it. He retreated to a house behind a high fence in rural New Hampshire and, in effect, disappeared. He gave almost no interviews. He published nothing at all after 1965, even though, by every account, he kept writing every single day for himself alone for the rest of his life. He died in 2010, at 91, having spent more than half a century hiding from a book he'd written as a young man. Two last things people rarely know. Salinger refused, absolutely and to the end of his life, to sell the film rights, turning down every studio and every star, convinced that Holden simply could not survive being played by an actor. To this day, there has never been a film of it, and there is a darker shadow over the book, too. It became notorious after a copy was found on Mark David Chapman, the man who murdered John Lennon and who had fixated on Holden. That grim association wounded Salinger deeply and helped drive him even further out of the world. So why should you read it, or read it again? Because if you were handed this book at 15 and decided Holden was an insufferable brat, the truth is you were reading it as his peer. Come back to it as an adult, and it turns into something else entirely. The portrait of a grieving child in free fall, surrounded by grown-ups who are all too distracted to really look at him. Read that way, it stops being irritating and becomes almost unbearably sad. And read it, above all, for the voice. Salinger pulled off something almost no one had managed before him. He got a real teenager onto the page. The rhythm of the speech, the wild exaggeration, the constant deflection, and the aching sincerity hiding just beneath the sarcasm. 70 years later, Holden still sounds like someone talking to you right now, tonight. That is why the book refuses to fade. Anyone who has ever felt like the only real person in a room full of performances hears their own voice in his. I'm Sarah, and this is Books and Authors Explained. The affiliate link to the book is in the description.